Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. As-salatu was-salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in, amma ba'd. Continuing the station of Tadhakur and Tafakkur, contemplation and remembrance, we reached the statement of the author, the original author, Abu Ismail al-Harawi rahimahullah ta'ala, in which he says, إِنَّمَا يَنْتَفِعُ بِالْعِظَةِ بَعْدَ حُصُولِ ثَلَاثَةِ أَشْيَاء شِدَّةُ الْإِفْتِقَارِ إِلَيْهَا وَالْعَمَى عَنْ عَيْبِ الْوَاعِظِ وَالتَّذَكُّرِ الْوَعْدِ وَالْوَعِيدِ. So here, if you remember last week, the concept of wa'adh, which is commonly translated as admonition, but admonition tends to be exclusive, or if not by definition exclusive to reprimanding someone. You did something wrong. So admonishment is telling someone you did something wrong, regardless of the way it's expressed, but it has to do with the negative side. Wa'adh is beyond that. It could be both discouraging someone for doing something wrong, saying this is a wrong act, what you did was incorrect, right? But it also includes the positive end, encouraging people to do good deeds, right? So wa'adh is a more comprehensive word than admonition. And in his statement, he tells us that to benefit from wa'adh, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls the Quran wa'adh, maw'idha. Ya ayyuhan nas qad ja'atkum maw'idhatun min rabbikum. O mankind, a maw'idha has come to you from your Lord, meaning the Quran, and through the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. So how do we benefit from this maw'idha that's meant to transform us on the inside and as a result change our behavior for the better, or refine, rejuvenate, refresh, whatever adjective you want to, or verb you want to attach to it. So it's supposed to improve us both on the inside and as a result on the outside. How do we benefit from that? He mentions three things. Number one, shiddatul iftiqari ilayha. Having the belief, putting it in your mind that you need this. You need the maw'idha. The maw'idha is something that, it's not something just beneficial to you. And I spoke about this, I touched on it last week. The difference between viewing something as beneficial versus viewing something as necessary. This is a necessity. I need this in order to succeed. It's very different than this benefits me. We're not as encouraged or enthusiastic about attaining what benefits us in comparison to that which we need and what's essential. So the first way to benefit from a maw'idha, right? What the Quran is telling us, right? We'll assume that's the maw'idha, that is the maw'idha. So what the Quran is telling us is the maw'idha. How do we benefit from what the Quran is telling us? Well, we need to have that feeling of need. I need to convince myself, I need to teach myself, I need to show myself that I am in need of what the Quran is telling me. I am in need of understanding every single word in the Quran. I am in need of understanding what Allah is telling me through the Quran and through His Prophet ﷺ. And to elaborate a little bit more, the maw'idha can be categorized into two types. You have the maw'idha of commands. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, do this, don't do that. The maw'idha comes in that when He tells us to do this, He says, if you do it, there's paradise. If you don't do it, right, there are consequences. And when He forbids us from something, He tells us if you refrain from it, there's reward. And if you do it, there's consequences. And if you fail or you fall short sometimes, every now and then, or even often, then there's repentance. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is encouraging us to adhere to His commands, and if we fall short, to repent. That is one category of maw'idha. The second category is what's called a targhib wa tarhib, a style in the Quran that is used in nearly every verse. Either encouraging us through targhib, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is encouraging us by showing us the reward, showing us the positive results of doing good deeds, right? And He does tarhib, He scares us, right? He discourages us by, striking a sensitive emotions in our heart that is meant to protect us. So fear, for example, is a powerful emotion. When you study in psychology, for example, the functions of fear, right? Fear isn't something negative. Right? Fear is a response, a human response, whether it comes from the mind or the heart, that's telling you something is a potential threat to you. You need to protect yourself. Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala utilizes this quite a bit. He says there's a hellfire, and this hellfire is extremely large. And this hellfire, it seems like it has its own type of perception and will. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes it as, if وَإِذَا رَأَتْهُمْ مِنْ مَكَانٍ بَعِيدٍ سَمِعُوا لَهَا تَغَيُّظًا وَزَفِيرًا. Right? If the hellfire sees them, meaning human beings, right, from far away, it starts roaring, right? It's hungry, is how it's sometimes elaborated or described in hadith. It's hungry, it wants more. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells it, are you full? It says, يَوْمَ نَقُولُ لِجَهَنَّمَ هَلِ امْتَلَأْتِ وَتَقُولُ هَلْ مِن مَزِيدٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, it will tell the hellfire, are you full? Right? Have you taken your what satisfies you? The hellfire will say, هَلْ مِن مَزِيدٍ, is there more? Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does that to put an image in our mind, to strike fear in our hearts. Right? But it's a positive type of fear, because fear is an emotion Allah created us with, and there's wisdom. There are many wisdoms behind it, as I just mentioned. So when we look at maw'idah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us commands and encourages us and puts fear in our hearts, right, to improve our behavior, to refine, refresh, rejuvenate, strengthen our iman, our hearts. Right? In order to truly benefit from this, when we approach the Quran, when we read it, when we listen to it, we need to enter with a point of view, a perspective, a mentality that I need what's being said to me. I need to know it. And I need to know it now. Right? If we can listen to the Quran with this in our mind, from this angle, subhanAllah, you start feeling that the Quran starts entering your heart the way water enters, a vessel. It just kind of flows, and it's so refreshing. You know how in Ramadan, after, especially the first day or two, when you first drink that water, how does it feel? How kind of, you can feel it entering your veins and your heart and your organs, subhanAllah, you feel it. Right? If we can listen to the Quran with this feeling of need, I need to hear what Allah is telling me, then you will feel that the Quran enters your ears and just starts going through all of your body. You can feel your heart start unlocking. Right? SubhanAllah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا. Do they not contemplate the Quran, or are there locks on their hearts? When you start approaching the Quran from the correct angle, you feel like the locks begin to unlock. You feel like there was something restraining your heart, sealing it. And then this is the key that unlocks it, the key of need. And this is a recurring theme throughout the book. Right? It's the key of need. It starts unlocking all those locks. And we all have locks on our hearts, and we all need to work towards unlocking them, no matter how high a person might have reached in iman. Right? There's always a lock or two that need to be unlocked. And unlocking each lock, you kind of break a shell. And now you're able to see the world in a more insightful way. You're able to engage the world in a more insightful way, in a more fulfilling way, satisfying way, subhanAllah. Continuing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmati wal maw'izati al hasana wajadilhum billati hiya ahsan." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, call to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the path of your Lord. And He gives us three strategies. Bil hikmah, with wisdom. Wal maw'izati al hasana, with a good reminder, with a good maw'idah. Wajadilhum, and debate them. Three ways. Now Ibn Qayyim says that these are three different tools, and certain tools need to be used on certain people, right? Just like, any sort of construction, you use a hammer for a nail, but you use a screwdriver for a screw. You use a wrench for a bolt. Now, if you use a hammer for a bolt, it's just not going to work, right? It's going to break the washer or the bolt, right? It's going to break it because it's not meant for it. Likewise, Ibn Qayyim suggests that these tools need to be used for certain people. If it's mixed up, it's just not as effective. So he says that for the bil hikmah, for wisdom, it is used for al-munib, someone who's already practicing, right? Someone who's practicing on the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are in need of knowing the amr and nahi. They need to know the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So someone who's already on the path, what strengthens their momentum to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is knowledge. knowing what's halal, knowing what's haram, knowing what Allah wants from us, knowing what He doesn't want from us, understanding the vision of Islam. This is what we need. And the debate between, or the topic of the scholar versus the worshipper is a very known topic in Islam, and scholars are pretty much in consensus about this. The knowledgeable individual is way better than the worshipper, right? And there are some examples, like 1,000 worshippers, or worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for 1,000 years. It doesn't equate to learning about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a certain period of time. Or 1,000 worshippers are not equivalent to one scholar. Or the example between, or the analogy between, or I'm sorry, the comparison between a scholar and a worshipper is like the comparison between the light of a moon, the moon and the light of a star. Right? It's very different. And worshippers can easily be misguided. And there are examples of that. George the monk is a common one. Barsisa, I think his name is in Arabic. I forgot the name. And his story is really a scary one. And it's a reminder, though. This individual, George the monk, was a worshipper. Secluded himself, a monk. He lived a monastic lifestyle. He secluded himself. And people saw him as, mashallah, this pious individual who worshipped Allah day and night. One day, 3 individuals had to go travel for a long time, and they have a sister. And I guess the father passed away, and she had no one to stay behind and take care of her. So they asked the monk, so this monk is a worshipper, he's someone who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm sure we could trust him. So they go to him, and they ask him, right, can you take care of our sister? We have no one else to go to. In the beginning he said, no way, this is a fitna. Right? This is a problem. Me to take care of a young lady who has no male relatives around her to keep eye on what's going on, right? That's just a disaster waiting to happen. So he said no, and he was very firm on that. They left, and then the shaitan came to him. Said, how are you going to leave that girl all alone? And what if someone comes and harms her? What if you could protect her? So he kind of thought through it and said, you know what, fine. He went and he told them, okay, I'll take care of her, but there are certain conditions. You leave her, she needs to be far away from me, right? And I'll just send her food once a day, and that's it. So they agreed upon that. So he started off by giving food, just putting it at the door, and then leaving. She would come out and take it. Shaitan comes to him again. Remember, this is a worshipper, but he's not a scholar, right? He says, you should check up on her. You're just giving her food as if she's some sort of animal, and you just leave and turn your back to her. Maybe she needs something, right? Maybe she's sick, maybe she needs clothes, maybe she needs help, or something like that. He said, no, until he convinced him. So he started to engage with her in conversation. And just to paraphrase here, because it's not the point, one thing led to another, until he fell in love with her, and they committed an act of indecency, and it impregnated her. Right? What to do now? He ends up killing her and the baby and burying her. When her siblings came back, her brothers came back, this is before Islam, by the way, so it's not a Muslim doing it. Not that it matters. He's a Muslim in a sense that he was following Tawheed and the true religion of that time. Her brothers came back. They asked, where is she? He said, she got sick and she passed away. I buried her. She said, okay. He's like, Qaddarullah ma sha'a fa'al, this is Allah's will, thank you, and, etc. So, one night, the shaitan goes to each of their dreams and says, he's a liar, she's buried there. He killed her with the baby, and she's buried there. They found this, this is a strange dream. And all 3 had the same dream. So they said this can't be a coincidence. They dig it up, and they find her body with the baby. They take him, they want to kill him. So the shaitan comes to him in actual form and says, I got you in this mess. I'm the only one who can get you out. So help me. What can you do for me? He said, I won't do anything until you prostrate to me. So he prostrated to him, and just before he died. Right? Now this is a rare example, by the way. So don't think all these people are left and right. But this is an example the Prophet ﷺ gives to us to let us know the importance of knowledge. This person was deceived and fooled because he did not have the intellectual tools to catch what he's trying to do, right? To learn how to repent, for example. Right? He didn't know that after the act, he could have repented. That there was another way out. He didn't know that the shaitan does this, right? So it's very problematic when someone is spiritually engaged without knowledge. It leads to deviations, it leads to innovations, and it leads to misguidance, right? So if you ever follow a human being, condition number one is make sure they are knowledgeable. Condition number two, make sure they got their knowledge from a teacher who's knowledgeable. And number three, take someone as a role model if they have already passed away. This is what Ibn Mas'ud tells us. من كان مستنا فليستن بمن قد مات فإن الحي يخشى عليه الفتنة. If you are going to take someone as a role model, then take a role model from the people who have already passed away, because the one who is alive, right, is still susceptible to fitna, to being tested and being broken, right? So, for someone who is engaged, right, we need to be wise in the way we approach Islam, in that we need to understand the wisdoms behind the halal and the haram. وَادْعُ إِلَى سَبِيلِ رَبِّكَ بِالْحِكْمَةِ. Understand what the person, the worshipper, needs and give it to them, right? So someone who is knowledgeable, who has ilm, true founded knowledge, when they deal with people who are religiously engaged, a religious community, they can start pinpointing the weaknesses of their iman and the strengths of their iman. So they start changing those weaknesses, they start strengthening them, and they, right, encourage them in that which they're already strong in. They continue to feed on it, right? So call to Allah with hikmah. Hikmah is used for those who are already practicing, understanding their needs. The second category is the one who's turned away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but out of heedlessness, out of preoccupation. Right? So such a person is not that they have friction with Islam, it's not that they are against Allah or religion, right? But they are just preoccupied, which is the vast majority of society. These people need the maw'idha al-hasana. These individuals, they need that reminder, the emotional reminder, right? To tell them, hey, there's a next life. There's a next life, and there's major dire consequences in the next life, right? If you do this, if you obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this life, there's rewards, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. If you disobey, there's consequences, is what He says. To get them emotionally aroused, but in a spiritual way. Getting their emotions to become connected to spirituality. So maw'idha al-hasana is used for people who are really preoccupied from religious commitment. The third category is the one who has turned away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but out of respite, out of animosity, out of adversity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or to Islam, or the prophets, whatever it may be. Such individuals need mujadala. They need to be debated. Debate is what works with them. You need to disprove their presumptions. You need to disprove their positions, because they'll come with arguments. Why don't you worship God? Well, there is no God. Why do you not believe there's a God, right? Human history has always accepted the notion of a divine being, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why have you changed that, or why have you rejected? Well, there's no evidence. Well, such a person, you need to debate them. Right? So these are three ways the verse tells us to call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we need to understand which tool to use for what category or what type of person. The second way of benefiting from a maw'idha is al-ama an aib al-wa'id. This is very important. Simple, but very important. And that is to overlook the faults of the one reminding you. If you view your teacher as being incompetent, if you view your teacher as someone who lacks credentials, or someone who you just don't like, right, or someone who is just ugly, right? When you look at that person from this angle, you're not going to benefit anything from them. This is the reality. It's going to go in one ear and leave the other. If you don't like someone, you're less likely to listen to them. This isn't rocket science. It's just natural human behavior, right? And the problem is that we tend to take this behavior to our scholars and the religious level, where we will ignore someone and what they are saying. We will automatically dismiss it simply because they are not part of my group, or they are part of some sort of other, group that I don't ascribe to. Or that person said something I don't like 30 years ago, and I won't listen to anything they say. And you see this, right? I'm sure you all have examples. Or maybe we even have some sort of bias in that regard. Well, I don't like that person, I'm not going to listen to anything they say. Right? We need to overlook that. And an interesting story in this regard, an individual, a student of knowledge, was studying with one teacher, and once he read what he could read with that teacher, he asked him, where should I go next? Who should I learn from next? So his teacher told him there's a scholar about 4 days travel from here. Go to him. His name is so-and-so. So he took his stuff and he traveled 4 days. And he found a village. He arrived there. He started asking, where's so-and-so, where's so-and-so? So they pointed him to the small house. He enters, right? Doors open. He enters and he sees a man wearing a towel on the bottom, covering the bottom half of his body, and in the upper half, he has no clothing, right? So he's shirtless, and he's baking bread. He's putting the dough together. He's putting it in the fire. He's baking bread, and he's all sweaty. So he looked at him, right? This is the scholar. Right? He looked at him in a funny way. So he left until he finished. Once the scholar came out, he said, Assalamu alaikum, I'm so-and-so. My teacher recommended I come and study with you. So that scholar said, you have no knowledge with me, go home. Immediately. You have no knowledge with me, go home. Right? He's like, I came 4 days travel. My teacher recommended you. Why are you telling me this? He said, when you entered, you looked at me in a condescending way. You're not going to benefit from me. If you see me as something lesser, how are you going to benefit from me? Right? It's like, when a 60, 70-year-old is listening to a younger imam. Who's this person? What can he offer me? Right? It's going to go in one ear and just leave the other, because there's that imbalance in understanding. So when we listen to a lecture, when we listen to a talk, right, we need to make sure that the person we are listening to, we don't have biases against them. Now, this doesn't mean we cannot pick who we like listening to more. That's not what I'm talking about here. But when we listen to someone, or when someone says something, right, who might not be in your okay list, that doesn't automatically negate what they're saying or dismiss what they're saying, right? And this is something academia really teaches you. You got to put away your biases as much as possible, although it's impossible to put it all away. But we cannot dismiss an argument just because someone we don't like said it. We cannot just dismiss the arguments of an atheist just because they're an atheist. It's not the way it works. And this is what the Sunnah teaches us. This is what the Quran and Sunnah teach us. Right? When the Abu Hurairah was once appointed to protect the house of money, house of wealth, right? Baytul Mal. They would take the zakah money and any of the expiation money, charity, and they'd put it in a house, right? And they'd have someone guard it. So Abu Hurairah was guarding it. And someone manages to get in without him noticing, but then Abu Hurairah checks and he notices that there's a guy in there trying to steal. So he takes him and he says, I'm going to take you to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, no, please don't. I have children and I have a family and we're poor. We have nothing. Please just let me go. So he let him go. So the next day he's with the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet tells him, what happened with you, Abu Hurairah? Tell me. Without Abu Hurairah saying anything. He knew. What happened? He said XYZ happened, right? And I let him go. He said he's going to come to you tomorrow. And the next day he came. And the same thing. And the third day he came. But the third day he said, you know what? I'm not going to let you go this time. I'm going to take you to the Prophet ﷺ. So he said, if you let me go, I'll teach you something. What's that? He said, I'll teach you something that if you say it before going to sleep, the shaitan can't harm you. Right? He said, what is that? He said, read Ayatul Kursi, recite that verse before going to sleep, and Allah will protect you. So he let him go. So the next day he goes to the Prophet ﷺ. He told me this. He said, Sadaqaka wa huwa kadhub. He said, he told you the truth even though he's a liar. And now it's a sunnah to do what? To read this verse before going to sleep. Right? Just because that person or that jinni was a shaitan, was a devil, did not negate the truth of this. Right? So this is very important when it comes to benefiting and learning. The third way to benefit is Tadhakur al-wa'd wal-wa'id. And this is another recurring theme in this book, is to remember the promises and the threats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنَّهَا لَكَبِيرَةٌ إِلَّا عَلَى الْخَاشِعِينَ, that it is difficult, it's a burden except on those who have khushu', meaning prayer and patience are a burden except for people who have khushu'. Who are the people of khushu'? الَّذِينَ يَظُنُّونَ أَنَّهُمْ مُلَاقُو رَبِّهِمْ وَأَنَّهُمْ إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. The people of khushu', and khushu' is this emotional attachment to something, where their response to a person or something, that thing that they are attached to has a lot of emotions involved. Right? الَّذِينَ إِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَجِلَتْ قُلُوبُهُم. Those who, if they remember Allah, their hearts shake because of their remembrance of Allah. Right? When they listen to the Quran, they feel the joy, they feel the accountability, they feel the concern, they feel the happiness, they feel all these emotions that we feel when reading the Quran or engaging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is khushu'. Right? So who are the people of khushu'? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they are the ones who are certain who are certain that they are going to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and that they are returning to Him. Tadhakur al-wa'd wal-wa'id, remembering the promises and the threats of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's how we gain khushu'. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَةً لِمَنْ خَافَ عَذَابَ الْآخِرَةِ. In that, this is towards the end of Surah Hud, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and Surah Hud is full of these stories of the prophets and what happened between the prophet and his people and the consequences of their disbelief, etc., and the punishment that came as a result of that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of this says that in that is a sign, meaning in that are things to learn from, morals, lessons, stories, right, to those or for those who fear the punishment of the next life. Right? What's the point of all these stories? How are we going to benefit from these stories if we don't believe that we can have similar consequences or similar things can happen to us if we disobey, right? So that's where the people who benefit from these stories are those who are, have this attachment to or consideration of Allah's promises and threats. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا يَتَذَكَّرُ مَنْ يَخْشَاهَا إِنَّمَا أَنْتَ مُنذِرُ مَنْ يَخْشَاهَا. I'm sorry. You are a warner for those who fear it. Fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the next life. So who are the ones who benefit from the da'wah of the Prophet? Who are the ones who benefit from the Quran? Are those who have this, concern of the next life. Because what's the point of Iman? I've said this multiple times. What's the point of Iman if you don't believe you're going to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And this is something only Muslims can come to a conclusion. Even Western philosophers have come to this conclusion, like Voltaire, right? And I mentioned his story before. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَذَكِّرْ بِالْقُرْآنِ مَنْ يَخَافُ وَعِيدٍ. Remind with the Quran those who fear my threat. Right? So, in order to benefit from the maw'idah of the Quran, the emotional reminder of the Quran, our hearts need to have this attachment and this remembrance and contemplation of the next life, of Allah's promises, paradise, and of His threats, hellfire. It's critical to our iman. Abu Ismail al-Harawi then says, إِنَّمَا تَسْتَبْصِرُ الْعِبْرَةُ بثلاثة أشياء تستبصر العبرة بثلاثة أشياء بحياة العقل ومعرفة الأيام والسلامة من الأغراض. So those who benefit from the lessons that the Quran is telling us. So first was the maw'idah. The maw'idah is talking to your heart, whereas the ibrah, the lesson or the morals, is now talking to your mind, your logic. And this is Islam. It's balanced between the heart and the mind. The West and Western discourse is heavily in favor of the mind and almost entirely ignores the heart. Eastern discourse is heavily in favor of the heart, right? And often rejects the mind. Superstitions, superficial beliefs, all these symbols that protect you from this and protect you from that, and these omens. If you see a rabbit, it means this, and if you see a crow, it means that, right? I mean, that's just people who are trying to interpret the world in an emotional way. But Islam is balanced between the two. The heart has its role, and the mind has its role, and they do not contradict. They work with synergy. And if one goes off track, the other one balances it out. If the mind tries to convince the self that something is permissible even though it's clearly haram, right? Or if the mind convinces itself that this investment is good even though the investment is haram, it's the heart that comes and says, hey, remember the next life. Right? Remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's reward and punishment. It's the heart that does that. And sometimes the heart desires something. It falls in love with someone and it wants to do something impermissible, for example. It's the mind that comes and says, this is haram. Allah said this and Allah said that. And these are the proofs. So it balances and keeps each other in check. Checks and balances, right? So there are three things. The first is to have a lively mind. And what that means is to have your mind is it's a good word for it. Your mind is thinking straight. That's what we say today. Your mind is thinking straight, right? It understands things correctly. It interprets things correctly. And in academia, we call this a method or methodology or epistemology. There is a way we interpret information and there's a way we present information. It has to be disciplined or else anyone would say anything they wanted to, right? If some crazy person were to come and say the sky is green, right? And we don't have a way of disciplining information, then how can we tell him no? So no, the sky is green and no one can tell me anything, right? Or they come up with false notions, false information, false history, whatever you want to say. And then they say it and there's absolutely nothing anyone else can say to reject that. It's me and my opinion, no one can say anything to me. So part of learning or understanding and taking from the lessons and the morals of the Quran is to understand how to interpret it, the correct way of interpreting it. So a simple example is that the Quran is Arabic, Quran and Arabiyan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that multiple times in the Quran. It is an Arabic Quran, to let us know that the way we understand the Quran is through the Arabic language. And the Arabic language was preserved or is preserved through Arabic poetry. And this isn't something strange or foreign. Even in studies of anthropology, they use what's it called? So studies in anthropology, if they want to study a word, for example, or a concept in an anthropological way, meaning they want to study the origins of a certain concept, they look at language. So for example, Tara al-Asad, one example he uses is the word faith. Right? How do we understand the word faith? Now he's talking about the secularization of, his book is The Formation of the Secular. How did the world become secular? Or what is the consequence or evidences that the world is becoming more and more secular? And he's an anthropologist, he's a PhD in anthropology, and I think he's a professor at Cambridge, or Oxford, one of the two. Very, very intelligent, mashallah. So he says, let's look at the word faith. And he studies it in an anthropological way. And how does he do it? He looks at plays of Western Europe during the 15th, 16th century and how it has changed. Now the term faith, hundreds of years ago, was an exclusively religious theological term. Meaning when he used faith, it had an exclusive meaning to theology or belief or religion. Whereas today, it's not the case. I can say, oh, so-and-so, I have faith in you. What does that mean? I mean, I trust you. But back in the day, that wouldn't make any sense, right? So in the Arabic language, how do we understand words? Through poetry, pre-Islamic poetry. How were the words used before? Right? And that is the miracle of the Quran. So someone who comes and says, no, I want to understand these terms based on modern notions or modern definition of these terms, right? It becomes very problematic. And a lot of people fall into this, by the way, without even knowing it. Right? So for example, the concept of slavery is a good example. How is slavery in Islam understood? It's understood through slavery in America, and they're two completely different things. But when you look at scholars, researchers, those who, they'll say that slavery in Islam was very different than slavery in America. And this is a non-Muslim saying this, Goldsmith, his Concise History of the Middle East, his book. He says that, in fact, slaves had a lot going for them. And I mentioned some of this in our History of Islam session, that some families will willingly give their children to Muslims as slaves. Why? Because the Muslims would take them, train them, educate them, make them into warriors and scholars, and then free them. So, It's better. It's a better life for them than what their parents were living. Right? It's an opportunity. To give an example, an analogy, it's like today how a lot of you came to America. Why? For education, for a better life, whatever it may be, right? And the parents weren't against that. They willingly let you go. Sure, it might have hurt them, and of course, that's just natural. But to get the visa to go to America, you're willing to give up a lot, or at least the previous generations were willing to give up a lot of things, right? So something similar to that. So understanding the Quran, what it's saying in an authentic way, in a disciplined manner. And our library, the Islamic library, is massive. The second element of understanding or benefiting from lessons and morals from the Quran and Sunnah is ma'rifatil ayyam. Understanding this term ayyam. And there are two ways of understanding this. Knowing the days, that's literally what it translates to. But it could be one of two things. How time changes our situation. One day we're poor, the next day we're rich. Or one day a person is rich, the next day they're poor. This is how life plays with the individual. Life is a roller coaster. It's never stable, right? It's never stable. And therefore, when we understand life to be so volatile, it gives us a different feeling and attachment to life than someone who thinks that I'm good for the rest of my life and I'm settled, right? So when we approach Islam from this, when we understand the Quran from this angle, right, and it helps us see the reality of what Allah is telling us. Because the Quran shows us that sometimes we are high and sometimes we're low. That's just the reality. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. We spoke about this verse either last week or the week before. These are the days we, change between people. Sometimes it's for you, sometimes it's against you, right? So when we understand when we are connected to the world, when we have a realistic understanding of the world, we have a realistic understanding of Quran. The Quran is realistic, it's not idealistic. But our youth, for example, the younger generations, because they're so detached from the world, from reality, right? Everything they have is brought to them in their schools. They're spoiled in schools. I don't mean they don't do any work. What I mean is that there's so much that schools offer, right? There's so much that society and the country offers them that they have so much free time to just play video games. Maybe a lot of you growing up in Afghanistan or Pakistan or wherever, life was quite different. You're up at sunrise or even before that, and you're not going to go look at your phone for the next hour. You're going to start baking bread, right? The father would walk miles to get something and come back, right? There wasn't time for that, nor did they have these luxuries. So they lived a realistic lifestyle. But someone who doesn't live a realistic lifestyle and the Qur'an's talking to them in a realistic manner, it just doesn't connect, right? Why would the Quran talk about warfare? What is that? Right? Because warfare is a reality of life. And the Quran came to regulate it. It's not about promoting it, right? It's about regulating it. Because anyone who's in politics or anyone who has government experience knows that war is not something people seek out. It's not something governments seek out because of how much damage it causes and how much money it wastes, right? But in general, wise people aren't going to seek out war or conflict. They're going to try to prevent it. They're going to try to prevent it by regulating it. So the UN, when it has these laws on war and whatnot, international laws that regulate war, why is that? To prevent conflict, right? And if conflict occurs, then to make sure that there is some sort of third party, that can create balance, all right, or hold people responsible or accountable. They may not be as effective as we'd like them to be, but that's the idea. The UN doesn't come out and say, no one can wage war, right? But a young individual, why are people fighting? And you have the songs like war, what is it good for? And absolutely nothing. The hippies, look, war isn't good, but sometimes it happens, right? War isn't good, but let's be honest. Some people need to be put in check, right? And anyone who lives a realistic lifestyle understands this, that there are devils out there. So the Quran is telling us, by understanding the realities that we live in, we better understand the lessons that the Quran tells us. Why is the thief's hand cut off? Why is there capital punishment in Islam? Because some people need that, right? Some people will not stop until that happens. That's the unfortunate reality, right? It's not that we are looking for this to happen, but if it does happen and someone is not willing to stop, well, we got to stop them, because if we don't stop them, they're going to harm other people, right? We need to be more compassionate even to criminals. Great, but to what extent? What if our compassion for these criminals actually harms other people? What about our compassion for those innocent people, right? Now, this is a big topic, and I'm just trying to give a very concise understanding to fit into this. We need to understand reality for what it is and how life changes. The other way to understand it is to understand the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His favors upon us. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ أَرْسَلْنَا مُوسَى بِآيَاتِنَا أَنْ أَخْرِجَ قَوْمَكَ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ وَذَكِّرْهُمْ أَنْ أَخْرِجَ قَوْمَكَ مِنَ الظُّلُمَاتِ إِلَى النُّورِ وَذَكِّرْهُمْ بِأَيَّامِ اللَّهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that He told Musa alayhi salatu wasalam to take his people out of darkness, meaning the darkness of shirk, darkness of being attached to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, into light, the light of having a strong, healthy relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and remind them of the days of Allah, meaning remind them of the favors and the major blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon them, like saving them from the children, from Fir'aun, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala splitting the sea and giving them passage, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all these favors. Remind them of that. Because when we are reminded of the major favors Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon us, it builds that sense of loyalty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It builds a type of attachment where, okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seeks to benefit me. I know that Allah seeks to benefit me because these are the examples. These are how He has benefited us in the past and how it brought about great results, right? The third element of benefiting from lessons and morals is as-salamatu min al-aghrad. And it means to be free from personal gain. Or another way to say it, not to follow one's whims and desires. Right? And this is the challenge of our time today. This is the human challenge that this book addressed in the very beginning, right? In the introduction. People find it difficult to understand the Quran, to follow Islam, because of the hawa, the desires that have overpowered their consciousness, right? So when someone has a desire to drink alcohol, well, it's not strange, right? Nor is it surprising that they're going to try and refute the unanimous opinion that alcohol is forbidden. It makes sense, right? It's not right, but you can understand why. So when a person has become so indulged in their desires and so concerned in fulfilling their desires, it completely skews the way they understand the Quran. Right? It smears their understanding of the Quran. How can they understand the Quran for what it is when their goal in life is to fulfill a self-fulfillment, and it's not to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them? Right? And Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi says something very beautiful. He says, the individual, if they follow their desires, it corrupts their opinions and their perspectives. So it causes them to see that which is good as being bad, and that which is bad as being good. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَفَمَنْ زُيِّنَ لَهُ سُوءُ عَمَلِهِ فَرَآهُ حَسَنًا. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings the example of someone who is so indulged in their opinions, or so convinced with their own personal opinions, so concerned with their own desires, that bad has been beautified in their eyes, right? To the extent that he sees it as good. SubhanAllah, right? And that's very, very problematic. Now, so these are three things that are very important when it comes to taking the lessons and the morals of the Quran, and that is to make sure we have a proper method of understanding the Quran, and we understand it in a realistic way, and number three, that we put aside our whims and desires and personal gain and let Allah speak for Himself, not us speak on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or make Allah say what we want Him to say, right? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the hearts and minds to come closer to Him and to fully engage, to be able to fully engage and benefit from the Quran. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in.